Welcome to the Nerd Journey Podcast. Our goal is to help you, the technology professional, accelerate your career progression, increase your job satisfaction, and be more effective in your existing role.
We want to bring listeners like you the career advice we wish we'd been given earlier in our careers.
I'm John White, at VJourneyman on Twitter, sharing co-host duties with Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_.
We're two former IT operations guys who have moved on to pre-sales roles with technology vendors. We have our opinions, but we also like to highlight the journeys of others and see what we can learn from them.
We'd also like to ask for your feedback to make this a conversation, not a one-way broadcast. Email us at nerdjourneypodcast@gmail.com or DM us at nerdjourney on Twitter. So come join us on our nerd journey.
Let's take a trip. Episode 326. If you had something useful to share, who would you share it with? And how would you do it? Daniel Lemire is an AI consultant at ServiceNow, and we're back with the final installment of his story this week. If you missed part one of our discussion with Daniel in episode 323, we talked about his reasons for pursuing management information systems, why he went into consulting, and why he eventually went back to get a graduate degree. We also talked about our careers as a minimum viable product that we can iterate on over time. In part two of our discussion with Daniel in episode 324, we talked about his progression to larger companies until he gained that enterprise experience. There was a parallel process of his gaining expertise and progressing to Windows technical lead, along with observing the actions of the larger enterprise organization to really understand what was happening. In part three of our discussion with Daniel in episode 325, we talked about his discovery of DevOps, the usefulness of it, some of the lessons he learned from being an infrastructure architect. We talked about his ability to influence innovation decisions within the enterprise, and then the decision to focus on innovation full-time. Near the end of part three of our discussion, Daniel made a vision board, and it brought him some renewed clarity and a perspective on that layoff event. This week in part four, after you reframe a layoff scenario, what's the next right thing to do? What exactly is AI mistakes? What prompted Daniel to start it in the first place? And why is it something he must be doing? We'll also talk about Daniel's move to pre-sales. How is this role a culmination of all his experience? And how is this a continuation of that theme of openness to new opportunities? Let's catch the conclusion of this story as we get you to part four of our discussion with Daniel Lemire.
What's so important, and it's reflecting on those ideas and those thoughts that was also the genesis of how I wound up falling into this AI mistakes thing that I started.
Ooh, I want to hear about this.
To kind of lay everything out, the way the timeline works itself out is I find out that I'm in the batch of guys that are out the door, but a strange thing has happened because there's a couple of different batches and how this is going to work. And basically what they said was, you're not going to get a review for this year. So here I am. I think I've got things figured out. I've done really well. I think I'm going to get a really great appraisal for having, taken care of business and done a good job. But actually, I got nothing. We didn't even have a review that year because it was already decided before objectives review that my role had been eliminated. Even now, I still don't know what anybody else actually thought of my performance that year that I figured things out. But they let me know that that was what was happening. And I said, and you're going to stick around with us into next year. I knew that my story was coming to an end, but that I had an obligation to fulfill if I wanted to get the package that was the severance. The strangest thing happened, guys. I wind up comforting my team about my departure.
Because they were super upset, super surprised, couldn't handle it, couldn't regulate their emotions, much like you had the issue of before.
Yeah, so I'm having one-on-ones with my directs and the other people on the team, and they're like, Daniel, what are we going to do without you? And I'm like, you're going to be fine. You know what you're doing. We're putting you in a position to be successful going forward. You don't need me to be successful. You just need to know that you can do this and you're good at what you do. And I'm going to help you be good at that. It just means that my next thing isn't here, and that's okay. I would not have been capable of having that conversation even a year prior because I hadn't done the work that I needed to do to understand. That was actually a really big confidence builder for me. Like I handled it really well, and I knew I handled it really well. There was really no reason for me to be mature about the thing at all. Like some of the other folks that were in that batch with me were just mad. Like a lot of people were really angry and in some ways self-destructive. I mean, it's a difficult thing to go through.
Oh, yeah. So many people are being impacted by this over the last few years.
I'm not going to lie to you. Having a severance package didn't hurt. My brother went through a similar situation, and he didn't have the benefit of a severance package. And we had a big heart to heart about, what that means and how that helps you negotiate the situation. It gave me a little bit of a parachute, if you will. I had time, but also going back to that conversation amongst our infrastructure peer group, like we all kind of looked at each other and said, we're going to do this as long as they'll let us. The flip side of that coin was, well, if I stay around and they decide that they're no longer interested in entertaining the agreement, I'm probably going to get some amount of time to figure out what's next. And so I can continue to do well at the things that I know I need to do. And I'm not going to focus on that, looking over my shoulder. That was kind of the moment where we all just kind of got over it and said, no, I know what I'm doing. I'm going to keep doing it. And if the situation changes, so be it. I'll deal with that when it comes. And that was kind of a stepping stone to building my maturity and dealing with that situation when it eventually did happen to me. But getting back to the AI mistakes discussion, what that meant was when I got the announcement that that road was going to end, that was like a golden ticket for me because I signed an agreement when I got my employment that basically said any idea in my brain was owned by the company. So part of the reason I ended my consulting business in 2009 was that I signed an agreement. I said, I'm all in. I'm doing it. And I was okay with that. This is what I wanted. So I ended the consulting and I stopped doing that work until I got the notification that they no longer really were interested in continuing the engagement. So I was able to go and start AI Mistakes before I walked out the door my last day working for them. I continued doing the absolute best work I could possibly do for them until the absolute last minute. And I'm very proud of the way that I handled that because not everybody did that. But also, honestly, that's a big risk for a company to take, to tell somebody, hey, dude, you're done, but you're going to work for another 6 months.
Well, sure.
I didn't want them to regret that, and I needed to be the bigger guy for it anyway. But then I could go and start. So I was able to file the paperwork for AI Mistakes. I was able to begin thinking about, okay, what am I going to do with this? What is my plan? And how am I going to think about what the next big consulting thing is going to be? Because I'd learned a whole lot in the intervening years. And one of the things I'd learned was, what are all of the things that I need to do to be successful at this? And one of those was having the maturity to understand, no, look, sales and marketing is the thing that matters and you're going to have to do it. And I'm ready for this.
Back to the uncomfortable.
The uncomfortable. But the name AI Mistakes came out of the recognition that is how we learn the best, even at a very technical level, right? You have to learn doing it the wrong way to understand what the right way looks like. And that's why you don't become an architect the minute you step out of college. You haven't had enough opportunity to make the big enough mistakes. The biggest growth moments were those times when I made a change somewhere that I shouldn't have done that. And I really broke things. And it took a lot of us, a lot of effort to recover from it. I mean, everybody's made a big mistake. And if you talk to anybody in operations, I guarantee you they have a Sev 1 story. And if it happened at the company they're still working out, you're probably not going to get it from them. But we all have them. But that's also what makes you stronger, is having been through that, knowing that other people have to go through that, and trying to put them in a position so that when that does happen, it's not the end of the journey for anyone.
And was AI something you were focused on heavily when you worked in the innovation team, or no?
Yes, actually, there were several major projects that the team worked on that were AI heavy. I got to first observe what other members of the team were doing with AI. One of the specialists on the team was building models and doing work with some manufacturing things. And it was a really fascinating project. And I didn't have the math brain to do the work that he was doing, but I got to see the results and the progress and the outcome. And I got really interested in AI having seen that. the difficulty thing for me there was that I couldn't do any of that work. I just knew that that was the right thing to be doing. And that was actually the case across a couple of different technologies. Sometimes my role in innovation more often was exactly opposite of what I had been doing previously in my career. Every job I had had at PepsiCo was being the subject matter expert. I was the big brain. The moment I stepped into innovation, all of that basically went away. The only thing I was really good at that I brought to the team was helping with architecture and mapping out how the systems should interconnect and how we should prosecute the program of dealing with all of the things. I was no longer the expert that knew how to do the specific thing. I was working with the team to make that happen. And that was how I really started with AI. But as I was watching the program, I was reading things in the background. Again, I wasn't in charge of doing that work, but I was learning about it in the background.
Sure.
And I even had an opportunity to start playing with GPT-3 when it was announced, because one of my colleagues on the innovation team, he came into work one day and he's like, have you seen this GPT-3 thing? Like, it's actually starting to work. And after he shared that with me, of course, I started looking into it and I went and got an OpenAI account. I was in there and I looked at it, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't really know what to do with it. I thought it was kind of neat, but I was like, okay, this is cool. But in innovation, like, we look at cool things all the time. What are you going to do with it? That's the only thing that really matters. And I didn't know what to do with it.
You couldn't find the value.
Yes, you got to get to the value. That is the number one thing I took away from my time in innovation is what is the value and how do you succinctly articulate that? Because I could virtually guarantee it, you're going to be talking to an executive to get them to commit dollars to what it is. If you cannot convince that executive to give you their money, it's not going to happen. So it can be the best technology. You can have the smartest people, but if they're not willing to put their money to it, it doesn't matter. And then ChatGPT happened. Then it was like, okay, this is going somewhere. I know what to do with this. And I started doing things in the background. Leading up to that, I had briefly played with GPT-3, but I didn't know what to do with it. What I did know what to do with was stable diffusion, because a big part of my role in innovation was building presentations. And one of the things that frustrated me a lot was being able to get the imagery that I wanted to illustrate the things that I wanted to talk about. I had 2 desktop systems, they're still sitting here with me right now, actually, that I had bought. And I bought the latest and greatest NVIDIA graphics card so that I could mine Ethereum. I was interested in all of the blockchain stuff. That was actually a part of some of the programs I was running in the innovation team was NFTs and, what are we going to do for the organization around cryptocurrency and addressing that. So we were focused on those things. And so I had to really bone up to learn about those things. And the best way I know how to do that is to build a lab at home. Like, that's what I did in infrastructure. So why not? And it was right about that time that Ethereum, you couldn't mine it anymore. So I turned my rigs off and they were sitting here idle. And then Stable Diffusion came along and I was heating up the room, making images. And then I started to learn about the models and how all of that was working. So I quickly became very familiar with those AI things. And then everything just kind of fell into place. This AI is a thing. The things that I've learned from my career. And I've learned enough in an enterprise environment that I can actually consult and help people understand what the next thing is that they need to do. Because the other thing that a colleague at work said to me was, you know a lot and you're not sharing enough.
Interesting.
And that's really what got me to go the YouTube route. It was this recognition of, okay, if I really do have something that's useful to share, who am I going to share it with and how am I going to do that? For years, I'd been spending my free time at night, doing the dishes or whatever, watching all of the latest tech things on YouTube. That's how I kept up with everything that was happening. And when they said that to me, the light bulb kind of came on. Well, if that's how I'm learning about things, why can't I do that for other people? And that's what really kickstarted that. And I was used to doing newsletters for innovation, so I started a newsletter. And then I'd done the consulting thing, so I help companies and their leaders make decisions on things, which was the most convenient progression for me ever, because as I was trying to figure out what I was actually going to do next, I thought AI mistakes could be that next thing. That could be the paycheck. That could be, and I'm going to treat this seriously, and I have time to focus on that. I went from one day going into the office at PepsiCo to the next day sitting here working the same amount of time building all of the things around AI mistakes. There was no, I'm free, I'm going to just sit down and watch TV, because that's not the kind of guy I am anyway. I get excited about something and I get after it, and that's what I did. Now, I mean, I took a big vacation with my wife for our 20th anniversary. I don't want you to think that all I did was sit here and work. But having done that vision board, I also knew that I have got to focus on all of the things. I can't just be narrow on one thing. I've got to think about the bigger picture. And as I'm doing all of these things with AI mistakes, I'm doing the YouTube, having the conversation, I'm getting better at preparing and talking about things. I actually think that the repetition of doing those things with AI mistakes is what put me exactly where I needed to be when I had the interview conversation with ServiceNow, because I knew what to say, I knew how to say it, and I coupled that and backed that up because I literally had a YouTube channel where all I did was talk about AI and how it was creating value. And I didn't do it for those reasons, but I'm not going to tell you it didn't help. I was able to monetize the channel, and that's something that not everybody can do either. Like, I'm very proud of that. I'm not getting rich off of that. It doesn't pay for my Descript subscription yet.
You'll get there.
The thing about it was the iteration and the feedback that I got from doing that helped me get better and put me in a good position for the next thing. And the mindset things that I tackled in the process gave me the confidence I needed to go into that room and have that conversation on the interview, why I was the right guy for that next thing.
The mindset things you tackled. Tell me more about that.
The mindset things that I had to tackle was I need to be working on something even if I can't show the payback on it. And I had done the work to know what I needed to be working on, and I just had to be confident that if I kept working on those things, that good things were going to happen. I'll also tell you, there was a time when the severance check ended.
As they all do.
And I didn't have the next check figured out. And I had a moment of panic. That was not a good week for me. But it was also the next week that I gave up. Harkening back to that conversation after the recruiter, I said, okay, what's next? And it was the next week when I applied for the job at ServiceNow. It took a little while for that to come to fruition, but it was my giving up and the steps that I took subsequent to that giving up.
Well, you write us your Post-it note, and again, I noticed that it didn't say make a living as an AI influencer and independent coach.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's talk about that, John. What I need to say is I was looking for insights in many different places. I got connected with a leader at the DFW prayer breakfast. One of my colleagues made an introduction to a CIO, and I entertained asking him for a mentoring relationship. And we had a quick phone call, and he was asking me what it was that I needed and what I was wanting. And he said, all right, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to send you a list of things that you need to answer these questions before we can continue. And the questions he sent me basically were, what do you want? So to be fair, my needs were pretty ambiguous as it came to a role. And the questions that he was asking me were very much more focused on what kind of role do you want from a career perspective? Like, what job do you want? I couldn't answer it. I didn't have that answer. To your point, it actually didn't matter. What mattered was what the job did in terms of fulfilling my needs as a contributor to an organization. And I applied to all sorts of jobs, architect jobs, product management roles, leadership roles, engineering roles, DevOps roles. And I had conversations about every single one of those. In fact, I had an interview across all of those. But for whatever reason, none of them lined up. It didn't happen. What I did get clarity on after he asked me that question was I was willing to place a bet on AI, because what I saw with everything I'd learned was that AI was essentially cloud plus mobile and then some. Like, I knew this was a huge opportunity like nothing else. So I was very clear after he asked me that question that it needed to be something with generative AI. And so after that, throwing my hands up and answering those questions, the filter became, okay, I'm going to look for a generative AI role across things that are familiar to me. But the other thing that he asked me in that question was, what kind of a company do you want to work at? And the early conversation, Nick, I think I told you, I said, I don't think the next gig is going to be enterprise. I don't think that's where I need to be. Yep. But after I had that deep dive questionnaire from him and the responses came back, it was, no, actually, that's where your skill set is. That's a major part of your value. That is a place you need to be. And so then I put the filter on, okay, well, I guess this is what I need to go after.
Seeking clarity.
That's all tactical application, right? The giving up on making it independent if you had held on to that, that might have been 100% ego, right? Like, oh, no, it needs to be this. This is the only way that I can measure success, is if this is successful.
Yeah, let's go into that just a little bit, because there's another clarifying point here for me. AI mistakes is one of the things I must be doing. There is a very clear calling for me to do that. The calling for me in doing that, though, isn't that's where I need to be earning what helps me take care of my family. That doesn't mean there's not a future for that to be the case, but that's not the reason for the existence.
Necessary but not sufficient kind of thing?
Exactly right. What's clear to me now, looking back over the last couple of years, is it was my recognition of what I lacked, which was deep sales and marketing experience. And I have to tell you guys, the go-to-market organization ServiceNow is absolutely incredible, and I'm learning things every single day from being in that organization, and I love it. Absolutely love it. How long am I going to be there? Honestly, I'm not putting a limit on it because it's creating value. I love having the conversations. I feel like I'm really actually helping people. Like, it is fulfilling the Post-it note in ways that I could not have imagined. In fact, I think the reason I needed that job was that I wasn't going to get all of those things from just doing AI mistakes. Or perhaps I couldn't get to those things in the time that I needed that to be the case.
So does advisory solution consultant mean that it's pre-sales?
It is a pre-sales role.
Okay. Just so we clarify that for listeners. That's what it sounded like, but I want to make sure.
So what I'll add to that is that I think we even talked about it, Nick, after I found out that things were going to change in the conversation, you would not have heard me ever say pre-sales. Like, that was not a thing that I had any inkling was going to be next.
I think I heard CTO at one point during our conversations, but not pre-sales.
Not pre-sales, but I love it. I wouldn't have it any other way. And it's accretive. So much of what I needed is coming from there.
I think another role that might have fulfilled it would have been technical marketing, which is, I would say, you could argue is or is not part of a go-to-market organization. I would say is. 1 foot in, 1 foot out, maybe.
The thing that I didn't understand about sales from the very beginning was that it's not about getting somebody to give you their money. That's what we all think about when we think about sale, right? It's transactional. I've read so much about sales in the last 24 to 36 months because I also immediately recognized when I started AI mistakes, like, okay, if this is going to be how you're going to earn your money, you're going to have to make a sale.
Yep.
Like, this can't be an afterthought. You've got to get after it. And so I read everything I could get my hands on. And that's probably a big part of why I was able to get a role in pre-sales, because I didn't walk into that just being a technician. I walked into that with many volumes of sales learnings in my back pocket. And having done inside sales doing innovation at a corporation meant that I had many conversations trying to convince somebody to give me their money to go and do the innovation thing.
And there were even shades of that in the architecture role, because you're selling the idea of we need to do cloud, DevOps, this process.
You're absolutely right. And it was a real fit because of that investment of time. And so the stark truth about your statement in terms of technical marketing is simply this. What we lack having the IT understanding is the why of the IT. And that is the equation that the sales and marketing solves. Because there's no reason to buy the technology unless it solves a problem, and you have to get to the heart of the problem. Like, what is the why? Why does this thing matter? And be able to elucidate that, both for yourself and for other people.
And is there value in solving that problem?
Is there value in solving that problem is right. I think I've told this story before, but one of the first trainings I did when I joined VMware was what they called value selling. And almost as an aside, the instructor said, well, of course, you need to make sure that you understand the actual, buyers' like metrics for their business success, or else you won't be able to align your solution with their success. And I went, okay, well, I've just gotten out of a decade of, IT, and not once did I ever think of asking my managers metrics for success. And the joke I always tell is like, hey, we need to upgrade from backup version 3 to backup version 6. And you said, why? And I was like, well, obviously it's twice as good, right? No connection to any business value at all. I did not get funded for that project.
There just was never a need for me to have to do that before I was on the innovation team, other than to the technical people, right? Because as an architect, Nick, to your point, it wasn't convincing a business person. It was convincing a technical person that this was the right answer. So yes, that was there, but it didn't leave the technical domain. And going all the way back to the grad education, what my capstone professor always called out was, we have an alignment problem. People that do technology don't know how to explain to the business people why the technology matters. And until you solve that problem, things are going to go sideways. It really is that simple. That is the number one problem we all have to solve as technologists and as business people.
A lot of people don't know whether they're working on something that makes the company money or not. That's a big problem. It's a lot easier to keep your job when you're working on something which is aligned with revenue. And that's not like a hard and fast rule. I'm just saying that it's easier. If you're working on something which is viewed as a cost center, then there's always pressure for the costs to go down. If you're working on something which is viewed upon as revenue generating, then the question is really more about return on investment. How much am I going to invest in this system, and how much do I expect to get out of it?
And even with all the graduate education, it took me reading the Phoenix Project to really understand that. That was the first time that I actually understood what question needs to be asked to get to that. And it took me many years beyond it to fully appreciate it.
I would also add that it took the enterprise context too, all those put together.
Yes, I had to have all of those pieces. And so, as life would have it, I built all the things, I use all the things, and it's been an incredible journey. I wouldn't change any of it.
So I'm going to ask one last question if I can.
Please.
Were there any other specific challenges that you see making a move from being a technologist at a customer to working for a technology vendor and possibly selling or persuading, building mindshare with the same type of technologists that maybe you worked with in the past, or perhaps different technologists and business folk?
What I needed was to separate myself from needing to have a certain level or title. I had to be willing to put myself in a different role or position. What's interesting is that while I am a higher level individual contributor at ServiceNow doing the pre-sales role, no one reports to me. I'm at the bottom of the food chain, as it were, from an individual contributor standpoint, because everything is above where I am from an organizational standpoint. And I work with sales executives and other solutions consultants. And while there are lower solutions consultants than at the level that I'm at, there is no one on my team that is at a lower level than I'm at. What it took was me separating myself from that need to be higher than someone else, to be in a place where I could serve the customers. Like, I had to have the experiences in being a manager and being in charge of the technical things and being the architect and driving the programs to be able to sit down with the people that are at our customers to help them negotiate the challenges that they're in. But that has nothing to do with the title. That was something that I didn't understand until I got into it. The reason I was able to get the role at ServiceNow was because I wasn't overshooting where I could add value. Does that make sense?
I think it makes sense to us because we're both in pre-sales, and we both know intellectually and emotionally that your kind of entry-level pre-sales position is a mid-career position. It is not an entry-level position that you get straight out of college as a 22-year-old. Now, that's changing, and they're kind of creating even more junior versions of pre-sales roles to capture, that more youthful cohort, for a variety of reasons, most of them good. But if you just looked at the title and, said individual contributor, not knowing what the salary is, and we won't talk about that here, but anybody can go on Glassdoor and probably, look up what the salary range for pre-sales people are. It's more than I expected to retire on as an individual contributor, in a small business, if I had made manager or even gone to work at a higher position at a larger business. So in order for that to present that much value, you have to be generating value in that role. And that takes a lot of different types of experience and skills. So that's a long-winded follow-up to, yes, both of us understand.
Thank you for that, because I didn't have it clear in my mind as well as you stated it there. That was really great. But, the other answer to your question, Nick, is no, I don't think there is anything that I'm missing having stepped into that. And I have to give credit to the team that interviewed and hired me, right? Because they clearly saw that I had what was necessary to be good at it. And, I had a great experience last week. I sat down with a team, we did the conversation with a customer, and I explained a whole bunch of things and did what I do. And we got into the post-customer conversation with the account executive. And he says to me, Daniel, that's top 3 conversation presentations I have ever seen in the last 10 years as an account executive. And I'm very appreciative of that feedback. And I try very hard to communicate with all of the teams, because I'm kind of in a special role. Like, I work with many teams. Like, I don't have a set of customers. So I'm sort of a free agent across the customer base. So it's kind of a special thing in a go-to-market organization.
Like a technical overlay that can be called into any team.
That's it.
Okay.
That's it. So I work with a lot of teams.
He's part of the Tiger team.
Kind of, in a way, yeah. Because not every conversation is going to be like that.
Mm-hmm.
I tell the account team, like, hey, when we're done, I want your feedback. If it's bad or good, I need to know, because I'm going to touch a lot of other customers. And if there's something I can improve, I need to get to work now. But getting that feedback from him, the thing that's still a little disorienting for me is understanding that I really am that good. Because on the one hand, it's like, I need to be confident, but I also have to be really wary of being overconfident.
Well, sure.
That's the balance.
So it's maintaining that balance. Yeah. And I don't know that I know how to do that. I'm just paying a lot of attention to it.
And in the absence of feedback, you're open to experimentation.
That's it. That's why the note's there. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome, man.
The advice that I think I remember echoing in my ears is to always think, wow, I really did well, and not, wow, I am really good. Because you can do well and you can do poorly, and that does not mean that you are good or bad.
I love that. The thing I did not expect is I really view myself as a performer. Like, it really is about the performance. Like, everything is about how I can serve them in the moment. And that's what's important.
That's the value you can deliver.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Daniel, thank you so much for your time this evening. You've been incredibly generous with it. What is a good place for people to follow up with you if they want to continue the conversation? Is that LinkedIn?
Yeah, LinkedIn is really a great place. So everything is there. And that links to both my ServiceNow work and my AM Mistakes work, and links to the YouTube channel and all of the other things. And feel free to reach out and connect with me, or send me a message when I have a conversation. If there's something there we can talk about, I would love to do that, and appreciate the reach out.
Awesome. Thanks again for joining us, Daniel. We really appreciate it.
Enjoyed it, guys. Thank you so much.
At the end of last week's discussion, we talked about that clarity that Daniel got that allowed him to process the layoff event a little bit easier. But this week, he needed additional clarity from a mentor to be able to figure out how what he wrote on the Post-it note translated into a role at a specific company. By the way, if you're someone who's been impacted by a layoff event and you're not sure what to do next, check out our layoff resources page at nerd-journey.com/layoff resources. Did you catch the part where Daniel mentioned he had to comfort his team about his departure? You don't need me to be successful. I think that is a great statement from a manager who realizes the potential in the team that, unfortunately, they have to leave behind. And the way Daniel handled his being laid off reminds me a lot of the way Marnie Coffey handled it. Go back to episode 280 and listen to her story so you can see the parallels. Daniel talked about ending up in this specialized role focused on AI at ServiceNow through the lens of other familiar things. But he also made a bet. He made a bet on a specific technology. And when you do something like this, you want it to have longevity in the market, something that's going to be valuable by the time you have enough expertise to really do well at it. You want it to be something that's still going to need people, still going to need talent to focus in this area. For Daniel, it was generative AI. I think you can compare this selection to the selection that Brad Christian was talking about in episode 264. He made a bet on going back to basics, focusing on operating systems like Red Hat. Both are very valid choices and options, and I think the decision tree in a lot of ways is similar. But as we make bets on technology, we have to make a bet on where the market is going. The market in terms of skills that will be needed, things that will be valuable to do, and the technology space in which the value can be created, as Daniel would say. I hope you enjoyed this discussion with Daniel. If you did, could you take the time to rate us 5 stars and consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts? We'd really appreciate it.
Farewell, listeners. Tune in next time as the journey continues. I'm John White at VJourneyman, for Nick Cordy at NetworkNerd_, signing off.
Adios.